Imagine a field so soaked in blood. A single day in 937 AD where five armies clashed, and the entire future of England hung by a thread. One king stood against a massive coalition of enemies who wanted nothing more than to tear his kingdom apart and erase his name from history. This is the story of the Battle of Brunanburh, the most important battle you've never heard of, and the day that decided whether England would even exist. Autumn 937 AD, somewhere in the northern hills of what we now call England. Mist clings to the ground as two massive armies stir in the gray dawn light. On one side, over 20,000 men stand beneath the golden dragon banners of Wessex. They've been drawn from every corner of an unprecedented unified realm, and they're led by a man who's barely 40 years old, but carries titles that would make any other king jealous. King Athelstan, King of the English, Lord of Britain, grandson of Alfred the Great himself. But on the other side of that misty field, an even more terrifying sight awaits. The raven banner of the Norse, the Lion of Scotland, the ancient emblems of Strathclyde. This isn't just an army, it's a coalition of pure vengeance. Vikings from Dublin, Scots from Alba, and Britons from the old northern kingdoms have all united for one single purpose: to shatter English power before it consumes them all. And here's the thing, their numbers match or even exceed Athelstan's forces. The next 12 hours will literally determine if England survives as a unified kingdom or collapses back into warring fragments. This isn't some border raid or dynastic squabble. This is a collision of two completely different visions of what Britain should be. So how did we even get here? Let's rewind. Before Athelstan, the island the Romans called Britannia was an absolute patchwork of warring kingdoms. You had the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms like Wessex, Mercia, East Anglia, and Northumbria. Vikings controlled the Danelaw and had a powerful kingdom in Dublin. The Scots ruled Alba in the north. Britons held Wales and Strathclyde. The Picts had their strongholds. No single king ruled more than a fraction of this land, and the idea of a unified England was literally just a dream. But then Athelstan came along and changed everything. Born in the 890s as the son of Edward the Elder and grandson of Alfred the Great, who had saved Wessex from complete annihilation, Athelstan was different from his predecessors. He didn't just want to defend his kingdom, he wanted all of England under one crown. When he claimed the throne in 924, he moved with shocking speed and ruthlessness. He absorbed Mercia. He conquered Northumbria, which was the last Viking kingdom in England. He drove the Norse kings back across the Irish Sea. He forced the Welsh princes to submit and pay tribute, establishing the border at the Wye. And by 927, he was styling himself King of the English. And he meant it literally. For the first time since the Romans left, one man ruled from the English Channel all the way to the Scottish border. Now imagine you're one of the neighboring kings watching this happen. That's exactly the position Constantine II of Scotland found himself in. This old king had decades of war experience under his belt, and he'd watched English expansion with growing alarm. He'd even been forced into a humiliating submission at Emont Bridge, where he had to acknowledge English overlordship and actually kneel to Athelstan. Constantine feared that Scotland would stop being a rival kingdom and become just another English province. And while he made public oaths, privately he was seething. Then you had Olaf Guthfrithson, the young king of Dublin and grandson of Ivar the Boneless. He watched Athelstan systematically destroy every single Viking kingdom in Britain. York had fallen. The Danelaw had submitted. Norse rulers were scattered or dead. For Olaf, this wasn't just about pride. It was about survival. There would be no place left for the Norse in Britain if this continued. And finally, Owain, King of Strathclyde, who ruled the Britons and saw his own future written in Athelstan's conquests. The English controlled Northumbria to the south and Wales to the west. Strathclyde was becoming a Celtic island in an English sea, and Owain knew there would be nowhere to run if the English finished their conquest. So in 937, these three kings made a pact. Three peoples, three ancient hatreds, but one common enemy. Constantine would march south with his veteran Scottish warriors who knew how to fight and shield walls. Olaf would cross from Ireland with young, hungry raiders eager to reclaim their lost lands. Owain would join with his Britons. Together, they would outnumber Athelstan. The plan was simple: invade England from the north, destroy the king in battle, and divide his realm among themselves. This was the greatest coalition ever assembled against England. If they succeeded, Athelstan's unified kingdom would die with him. If they failed, there would be no one left strong enough to stop England's rise. Summer of 937, word reached Athelstan that the invasion was coming. The coalition was gathering near the Scottish border with the intent to strike deep into the heartland before he could fully mobilize. Their strategy was to burn, plunder, and force a battle where their superior numbers would tell. But Athelstan didn't hesitate. He called his banners immediately, and warriors came from everywhere: Wessex, Mercia, East Anglia, and even from conquered Northumbria. Lords, Thegns, Huscarls, and Ferdmen. These were men who spoke different dialects and had fought each other within living memory. But now they all served one king, with his brother Edmund at his side. Barely 20 years old, but already a tested warrior and heir to the throne, Athelstan marched north quickly, gathering strength as he moved. He was determined to meet this coalition before it could ravage the Midlands. Now, here's a frustrating fact. The exact location of Brunanburh has been debated for literally 1,000 years. Some say Brunanburh on the Wirral. Others argue for the banks of the Humber or the moors of Northumbria. All we know is the name. Brunanburh, a field, maybe a valley, perhaps near a ford. But honestly, the geography mattered less than what was about to happen there. The coalition arrived first and chose their ground carefully. They picked an open stretch of land wide enough to deploy their full forces, with gentle slopes for clear visibility. This was familiar northern country for the Scots and Britons. The air was cool and damp with the smell of heather and peat. The commanders held a council. Constantine, being the eldest and most experienced, argued for patience, suggesting they let the English tire themselves out. Olaf, younger and more aggressive, wanted to attack at first light and overwhelm the English before their formation was complete. Owain urged unity above all else. Their final plan was straightforward: form a massive battle line, let the English exhaust themselves attacking, then use their flanks to envelop and crush them. Simple strategy. They believed their superior numbers and rage would be enough. But Athelstan faced a unique challenge. His army was unified in name, but not in blood. Wessex men stood alongside former Mercian enemies. Northumbrians fought beside the English conquerors who'd subdued them. Ferdmen, who were just farmers and craftsmen, stood beside professional Huscarls. This army of a united England had never been tested together like this. Athelstan made his decision. He wouldn't try to outmaneuver the enemy or seek terrain advantage. He would do what English kings had done since Alfred: form the shield wall and hold. They deployed in a deep, dense formation with the strongest troops at the center. The king's household troops, who were the best armed and most experienced. Edmund commanded one wing, trusted Ealdorman commanded the other, and the Ferdman filled the ranks behind the professionals. The night before battle, Athelstan walked among his men. He didn't need grand speeches. These warriors knew exactly what they were fighting for. They were fighting for a kingdom their fathers and grandfathers had bled to create. They were fighting so that England wouldn't die before it truly had a chance to live. That night, fires flickered like scattered stars across the moorland in both camps. Men sharpened blades and checked shield straps. Some prayed to God, others to older, half-forgotten gods. Some wrote messages for loved ones. Others just sat in silence, staring at the distant enemy fires. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain that never actually came. Sentries watched for night attacks, but none came. Both sides knew this fight would be settled in daylight, face to face, shield to shield. No tricks, no mercy. When the first gray light touched the horizon, commanders bellowed orders. Warriors donned mail and helmets, hefted spears and axes. The coalition arrayed itself across the northern field, a vast bristling mass of weapons and fury. The English formed up opposite them, fewer in number perhaps, but in perfect, unmoving ranks with shields locked tight. 500 yards of empty ground lay between them. Then the kings took their positions. Athelstan stood at the very center of his line in his royal armor, clearly visible to everyone. He wanted his enemies to see him. This king would not hide in the rear, but fight alongside his warriors. Constantine and Olaf saw this and understood immediately. This would not be a battle where kings stayed safe in the back. This was going to be personal. The sun climbed higher. The wind dropped. There was absolute silence as both armies stared across that divide, waiting for the signal that would unleash the storm. Then the horns sounded. The drums began their rhythm. 20,000 warriors on each side started forward, moving as one massive entity, closing the distance with every step. The Battle of Brunanburh had begun, and by the time the sun set that day, the map of Britain would be redrawn forever. The sound wasn't like thunder. It was worse. 40,000 men total, smashing together in one horrific moment. Shields splintering, iron ringing on iron, wordless roars blending into one overwhelming wave that drowned out thought and left only pure instinct. Olaf's Vikings on the coalition's right flank surged forward the fastest, hitting the English left wing like an absolute battering ram. Shields forward, axes rising and falling, Norse battle cries echoing across the field. The English line buckled under the impact, but it didn't break. The mail-clad Hussars locked their shields and pushed back hard, stabbing with spears over the shield rims. They held their ground because the alternative was death. Meanwhile, in the center, Constantine's Scots advanced steadily, their shield wall disciplined and tight. These were veterans with decades of experience fighting the Norse. They didn't charge wildly. They marched step by step, closing distance with the English center where Athelstan himself stood. When those two shield walls finally met, the crash echoed across the moorland. Neither side moved initially. They just pushed. Shields grinding against shields, men gasping for breath, unable to step back or move forward. This was the brutal contest of pure strength and endurance that would define medieval warfare. And then the killing really began. Spears thrust over shield rims, axes hooked over shields, dragging them down and exposing throats and faces to quick killing strikes. The second and third ranks shoved forward with all their weight. Men in the front rank died quickly, crushed or stabbed by spears they never saw coming, pulled down and trampled underfoot. But here's the thing. Behind every fallen man, another warrior stepped forward. The line held. On the English right, Edmund's wing clashed with Owen's Britons, and those Britons fought with desperate fury because they knew that if England survived this day, their kingdom would be next on Athelstan's list. They hammered the English right relentlessly, trying to break through and flank Athelstan's position. Edmund, barely 20 years old, rallied his warriors again and again, leading countercharges that drove the Britons back before retreating to defensive positions when the coalition regrouped. This was brutal, grinding combat with no elegance and no mercy. The battle became a fog of dust and blood where men couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. Warriors knew their comrades only by shield colors and helmet shapes. Commands were impossible to hear over the chaos. They fought by instinct, by training, by the simple will to survive. When men fell, their companions stepped over the bodies because stopping meant dying. Hours passed. The sun climbed toward noon, and neither side had broken. Casualties mounted into the hundreds, then the thousands, then more. But the lines held. Warriors who'd been fresh at dawn were now gasping for breath, their arms leaden, their shields splintered, their mail dented and torn. But they couldn't stop because wavering meant the other side would pour through the gap. Athelstan fought in the very center of his line, not directing from some safe distance, but standing in the shield wall with his household troops. His sword was red to the hilt, his voice hoarse from shouting. He killed Scots who broke through the front rank. He steadied warriors who faltered. He made himself visible, made himself a target, because if his men saw their king bleeding and fighting, they wouldn't break. And across from him, Constantine matched that commitment. This old Scottish king was past 60, an age when most men sit by fires telling stories to their grandchildren. But he stood in the front rank with his warriors, his sword as steady as it had been 40 years earlier. He'd spent a lifetime fighting for Scotland's independence. He would not flee now. It seemed like the battle might never end. Neither side could gain advantage. Neither could afford to retreat. They were locked together like two wounded beasts, tearing at each other, but unable to deliver the killing blow. But then something started to change. Not all at once, but slowly, like ice melting under pressure with hairline fractures spreading through the structure. The Vikings, who'd fought with suicidal fury for hours, throwing wave after wave at the English left, began to realize that the English line had not broken and was not going to break. Their casualties were terrible. Jarls and housecarls were dead with nothing to show for it. The English weren't weakening. They actually seemed stronger, with fresh warriors rotating up from the rear ranks. The Vikings began to hesitate. Their attacks became tentative and probing. Men started looking over their shoulders, wondering about withdrawal routes. In the center, the Scottish shield wall was still intact but being pushed back step by step, yielding ground they couldn't afford to lose. Athelstan's household troops hadn't given an inch. They'd fought with the discipline that comes from years campaigning together, rotating tired men out and bringing fresh warriors forward, maintaining the shield wall's integrity despite the bodies piling up at their feet. The Scots could match their courage, but not their endurance. On the coalition's left, Edmund sensed weakness and pressed harder, committing his reserves in savage counterattacks that drove the Britons back and threatened to turn their entire flank. Owen tried desperately to rally his men, but they were exhausted and bloodied and losing faith that this battle could actually be won. The coalition had gambled everything on breaking the English in the first hours. They had not broken. Now the sun was descending toward the western horizon. Both armies were bleeding and tiring, and survival was becoming more important than victory. Athelstan saw it all. He saw the Vikings hesitate. He saw the Scots waver. He saw Edmund pushing the Britons back, and he knew that he had to press now or let them regroup for another day. It had to end now. He raised his sword high and shouted the command every English warrior had been waiting for. Forward! The shield wall surged ahead. Not a cautious advance, but a sudden violent charge that caught the coalition completely off guard. Men who'd been locked in defensive combat for hours were suddenly attacking, driving forward, breaking through weak points. The battle turned from a grinding stalemate into a chaotic melee in seconds. The Vikings tried to hold, but Edmund's wing hit them from the side simultaneously. Caught between two English forces, the Viking line just disintegrated. Warriors were surrounded, cut off, fighting for their lives. Some died where they stood. Others began to run. In the center, the Scots felt the pressure intensify as the English stopped just pushing and started killing with methodical efficiency. Warriors fell back in panicked withdrawal, not an organized retreat. The shield wall that had held for hours began to fragment. Constantine saw his army breaking, and there was nothing he could do. He tried to rally them, tried to form a new line, but the momentum had shifted too far. The English were through the line now, into the coalition's rear, cutting down fleeing men without mercy. The retreat became a massacre. The Britons were the first to fully break, abandoning the field and running north in a desperate attempt to escape before English cavalry caught them. Many didn't make it. The English pursued with vengeance, cutting down fleeing warriors with no mercy given. Olaf, the young Viking king from Dublin who'd come seeking glory and reconquest, fought his way out of the encirclement with the remnants of his bodyguard and fled, leaving behind a fraction of his army with his dreams shattered and his reputation in ruins. Constantine retreated in better order, but was equally defeated. He'd lost his son in the battle, killed in that final English charge, his body left on the field among thousands of dead. The old king had risked everything to stop English expansion and had failed. His army was broken. His son was dead, and Athelstan's kingdom still stood. The English didn't pursue far. They were exhausted and bloodied with no desire to chase a broken enemy into the darkness. They had what they needed: a total, unambiguous, undeniable victory. As sunset fell on Brunanburh, the English warriors stood among the dead and realized what they'd just done. They had faced the greatest coalition ever assembled against England, and they had destroyed it. Thousands of enemy bodies were scattered across the moorland. Scots, Vikings, and Britons mingled in death as they had in alliance. The coalition had come to shatter England. England had shattered them instead. Athelstan walked the battlefield as twilight fell, moving among the wounded and dying, checking on his own warriors, seeing which lords and thegns had survived. English losses were severe, hundreds, perhaps thousands dead or dying, but they had held when the coalition threw everything at them. The line had held. The threat was broken. Edmund found his brother near the center where the fighting had been worst. The young prince was covered in blood, some his and most not. They said nothing because there was nothing to say. They'd survived a battle that could have ended everything Alfred had built. Not just survived, won. By morning, the coalition survivors were miles away, running for Scotland, Strathclyde, and ships to Dublin with the shameful task of explaining how their great invasion had failed so catastrophically. They left behind their dead and their dreams of breaking English power. Athelstan stood on that blood-soaked field and knew something fundamental had changed. His kingdom had been tested as never before, and an army drawn from different peoples and traditions had fought as one, not for gold or glory or revenge, They'd fought for England, and England had survived. The sun rose the next day on a kingdom that would not fall. The coalition was broken, the enemies scattered. The Vikings would never again mount a serious challenge to English rule. The Scots would retreat behind their borders for generations. The age of England had truly begun, forged in the fire of a single day's battle, and paid for in the blood of thousands of men who died believing their cause was just. Athelstan ordered the march south, his army, battered and exhausted but victorious, formed their ranks, and began the long journey home, leaving behind a field that would be remembered for 1,000 years, not for its location, which was lost to history, but for what happened there. The battle that proved England could endure. The day when 5 armies tried to destroy a kingdom, and the kingdom destroyed them instead.